Good morning. Today we are going to be talking about chosen instruments, right? We're going to be talking about what God declares us as a chosen instrument. But before we get into that, I hope you had a great weekend. I had a great weekend. My in-laws were in town, and my grandma-in-law, I guess that is what you would call her. If you ask my wife, I'm terrible with names. Like I will call your cousin your niece, and your like dad your uncle or something like that. So I'm really bad at that. But my grandma-in-law loves Rays baseball. Do we have any Rays fan in the house? Most of you know, like me and my wife, we still live in Lakeland. We're working on moving over here to Tampa. So I decided, hey, let's make me a true Tampa-er-in or whatever it is, and let's go to a Rays game. So I got to go to a Rays game for the very first time yesterday. It was a lot of fun. Thank God it was in the AC. It was awesome. So that was really cool. But yeah, we got to go to the Trop and see a game, and it was really cool. And I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I am a big sports fan, as you know. And so I got to go see them play and see them win, obviously. So that was really cool. But what I love about baseball, this is like one of my favorite things about baseball. It's super silly, but there's a PA announcer, right? And they have walk-up songs for every batter, right? 1 through 9, they have a walk-up song, and some of them like do like Miley Cyrus to be funny, and some of them do like their favorite song. Um, and what's really cool is the PA announcer will do the walk-up song and be like, "Oh, Diaz, first baseman, is up to bats lead off, or whatever, right?" And so it's really cool to see the PA announcer have this career of just announcing these people. And so it's really cool that they get into it, and some of them are a lot better than others. But it's really cool that they just have this declaration. They declare, "Hey, like this is the person, this is the position," right? And the whole crowd knows. Even when there's a home run, they get over the intercom and they do that there is a home run as well. And so today we're going to be talking about what God is declaring in our lives, right? And if you spend any time in church, you're going to know what Acts 9 really shares. And so today we're going to be talking about a guy named Saul who had a second name, and maybe know him as Paul. And so we're going to be in Acts 9, starting in verse 4. And there's this situation in this story that goes on between Saul and Jesus and Ananias. And we're really excited to see what happens. But before we get into that, I want to tell you exactly what I want you to go home with, okay? And this is what God declares about our lives, that no sin separates us from being a part of God's story. That no sin, God declares that no sin separates us from being a part of his story. And I think if we read Acts 9, you'll see what I mean. So it will be Acts 9, verse 4, and we're going to go to 19. This is what it says. If you have your Bibles, you can open it there. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could not see nothing. He could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. For he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." Verse 13. "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with the authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and to their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show how much he will have to suffer for my name." Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. So we call this Saul's conversion story. And we see this wild story play out between Jesus and Saul and Ananias, where Saul is the leader of murdering Christians, especially in Jerusalem. Right? And we see Jesus, what does he do? He encounters Saul, and they can hear his voice, Jesus' voice, but they can't see Jesus. And they're questioning, they're scared, they're a little afraid here, right? And then Ananias kind of comes in the story, and the Lord is calling Ananias, hey, I want you to go over here because Saul's over here, and he's seen what I'm about to tell you in a vision, right? And so Ananias is not only challenged, but so is Saul. And they have this crazy encounter with Jesus. And I think this part of the story in Saul's story is showing us that declaration, that God declares that no sin separates us from being a part of God's story. If you spent any time on this earth, you know that you're not perfect. That we know that there's only one perfect person, and he walked in this life. His name was Jesus, and he died for you on a cross for your sins. Most of us know that. If we don't know that, I hope you know that today. And the crazy part of this is that Jesus uses Saul. He's kind of the last pick on the job description to fill this role. That we see Saul, he's a murderer, first off, a murderer of Christians, and he's the leader of the murder of Christians in Jerusalem, right? And so we see that Saul is all of these things, and he would not be the person to help lead a Christian group, right? Let alone even be close to them. You can understand why there would be some fear in the disciples' eyes later on that Saul becomes this leader. You see, Saul's story is showing us that God is declaring that no sin separates us from being a part of God's story because of what Jesus did on the cross for us, right? Acts is all about the church. And Jesus is trying, and our author, Luke here, is trying to get us to understand that, right? And I know you might feel like Saul today. You might feel like Ananias today. I don't know where you are, but I know where Saul sits is that he's conversion. He's just started this conversion story, this following of Jesus, right? And we in our human nature can realize why is Saul picked? There's a reason Saul is picked. And I think that can bring us to our second declaration. If you look in verse 15, it says this, "Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and to their kings and to the people of Israel." I don't think it's an accident that Luke includes that last part of it, the people of Israel and their kings. That Saul was pointed out to be the specific person for this group of people, right? And even though this is a dodgeball at recess kind of lineup, and Saul's the last pick, he's picked first. As we read this, we're a little confused what Jesus is doing. But the reality is that Jesus is choosing Saul to be a person and a chosen instrument. That he is the chosen instrument of the people of Israel to show them Jesus. And you might feel like Saul today. You might feel like, this dude is so unequipped. He's the last person you would fill the job description in the role for, right? I've felt like that at times where I felt so unequipped, so unqualified, underqualified for the job, all of these things, right? And you might even feel like that today where God is calling you to do some things that you don't feel like you're qualified for, that you don't feel like you've proven Jesus' trust enough with doing enough for him, and you don't feel like this is the role that God has for you, but he's calling you to do these things that you're just unsure about. That there's a community around you, or maybe in your family, or maybe at your workplace, or maybe even at your school, that God is calling you to talk to these people about Jesus, to have leadership in these ways, and you're like, hey, God, I think you got the wrong person. But what's really cool about Saul's story is that does not happen. Saul does not question God. He doesn't give God excuses. He continues, and we see in verse 18, immediately he goes. There's a season of my life where I felt this unequipped thing that God was calling me to do. Most of you know Johnson University is where I went to school for 4 years to get my ministry education. And when I was there, I knew I wanted to play a sport. So I showed up. I didn't really play sports growing up, like on a team, like at school. I just kind of played with my friends. And I showed up to school and I'm like, hey, I kind of want to play a sport. And they had soccer, they had cross country, and basketball. I wasn't very tall, so I wasn't going to play basketball. I didn't like to run, so I wasn't going to do cross country. So I was like, soccer it is. So I show up to spring training one day, and I'm just try out for the team. They let me on. And so we come into the fall of my first season, and I start all like 11 games or whatever, and we go 0-11. And I'm like, all right, this was fun. You know, we didn't win a single game that year, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And so we are going through this season. It was fun, but obviously winning or losing was not fun. And so we come into the spring semester. I've learned a lot. I'm trying to grow as a player. I'm in my sophomore year, and we're doing some spring training. And afterwards, my coach, a dear friend of mine named Andy, wants to talk to me afterwards. Me and my friend David, and he's talking to us about the upcoming season and all of that stuff. And then I remember him saying, oh, yeah, by the way, like, you guys are my captains next year. And I'm sitting there going, me, and like, I understand David. Like, David played soccer his whole life. He's great. But, like, me, like, you want me to be captain? Like, I barely know what to do with this ball, right? And I was super confused when my coach asked me to do this. And I flat out said, Coach, are you sure you want me to be captain? Like, I'll do everything else you just asked me to do, but be captain. And I remember clear as day, Andy looked at me and he was like, Michael, skill I can teach you, but leadership I cannot. And I just remember just sitting there like, I didn't have a response for that. And like Andy saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. That he saw someone who could lead people, and even though he didn't have all the skills and everything to put together, that he could lead and work hard and play hard and all that stuff, right? For those of you who have been on teams, you know that captain is supposed to be like the best, the most skilled, all those things, right? But we see that throughout time that sometimes it's the oddball, the less successful, like the one who just has that leadership quality. And, you know, this really meant a lot to me because through those seasons, God was working through me. He was teaching me leadership skills that I use every day as a youth pastor, right? And I had no idea. Yet, I think Saul's story might be a little bit in that. Of that Saul was the person that would have been the last person for the job. He could have given Jesus all these excuses, but he doesn't. He goes. And so I think that Saul's story is declaring in us that no sin separates us from being a part of God's story, but also that we are a chosen instrument for God. That if you are a follower of Jesus, that God has chosen you to be his instrument, a part of his kingdom, to a specific group of people. That might be your family. That might be leading your family in Jesus and having them come to church and growing them up so that they can grow their family in Jesus. As simple as that sounds, that might be it. That might be the community, the chosen instrument that God has for you. It might be the people you're working with. That you might be sitting there today being like, Michael, God, I'm doing all the right things. I'm saying all the right things. I'm trying to be the big Christian leader, all that thing, but I keep being jumped for a promotion. I keep being fired and let go for no reasons. I don't understand, God. Why are these things not working out in my favor? Right? All of these things we have to deal with in this life. But I think what God is declaring in our lives through Acts 9 is that we are his chosen instruments. Right? I think one way God has used me as a chosen instrument is through the next generation. I truly believe that. I truly believe that God has really called me to help affect the kids and youth of New Beginnings and of his world, right? And I have to tell you something that God's declaring in my life. It's going to sound so sweet. It's this, that Michael, you're not in control, right? How many of you like to be in control sometimes? All right, right? I like to be in control sometimes. I like the classrooms to look a certain way. I like to drive I like to park in it, right? I like all these controls, right? And God's declaring this in my life, and I'll be super transparent with you in this way. Is that when I first started here, we had like 2 students, right? Our awesome 2 students that would come to youth group, right? And some nights we'd have 0 students. Some nights we'd have 1 student. And I would just pray to God, God, send us 1 more student next week that we didn't see this last week. And I would just pray it over and over and over again. And it just wasn't happening. Like October to like 2 months ago. It just was not happening. So there's like 4 months of this happening. And I'm just like, I'm doing the right things, God. I feel like I'm doing the right things. Like, am I not? Am I not here? Is this a wrong calling? All that things, right? Questioning God, you've been there. And then 2 months ago, we have 5 students show up to go to our middle school retreat at Lake Wara. And in the past like 4 Wednesdays, we've had like 9 students show up. And so God is like telling me, Michael, just because I'm not feeling these answers, I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes right now, doesn't mean I'm not in your life and that you're not doing the will of God. It just means that it's not for right now. And maybe God is declaring that in your life. And I know time and time again, he's continuing to challenge us to give up control to him and trust in him. And I know at New Beginnings that we're doing that. I know with our children's ministry and our youth ministry and all around ministries, we are doing that. And we got to continue to give up that trust and that control to him. And that's so hard. I have to be honest. It's so hard because time and time again, we have to continue to realize, is this God's will or is this a Michael will? Like, I have to ask God that. And that's a really hard place to be in. But if we are serving God like we should, we have to give up that control. And so those are the 2 declarations, is that God declares that there is no sin that separates you from being a part of his story, but 2, that you're a chosen instrument. Share his message and go. If you continue reading in Acts 9, verse 19 and 20, it's really good. Saul's story kind of is continued. And it says this: Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. At once, he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. So we see that Saul immediately goes, right? In verse 20, what sticks out to me is the word at once. What that means is immediately. We see that in verse 18 as well. And that Saul doesn't stick around and say, okay, let me get in the pecking order with the disciples. Let me like sit back and figure out how all of this works. No. He goes straight to the synagogue and he starts preaching the gospel and telling people that Jesus is the Son of God. How huge is that? I think that declaration, the declaration in that is that you don't have to be perfect to share the message of God. I think you just got to be faithful. And that's awesome. Because if you would have told 7-year-old Michael, hey, one day you're going to be up on a stage preaching and you're going to be talking to youth and all that stuff, I would have called you crazy because I couldn't put a sentence together, right? I have to put sentences together now. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. But that's what God does, and that's what Saul's story is that he uses the unequipped to equip. Well, how does that make sense? Because he's God, and he works through our weakness. And I think that he's declaring things in our lives like this, that you don't have to be perfect to share the message of God. You know, as we think about the ways that Jesus used Saul, it reminds me of tools and things like that. I like to be what I call a make-believe carpenter. I like to build things and do things like that in my spare time. I've built like a dining room table and a workbench. In my office, I built a desk and stuff like that. And so I love that stuff. But sometimes I will not have the right tool for the job, if you know what I mean. And so I get like really frustrated, and I'm like, why is this not working? And it's because I have the wrong tool for the job. And so I'll be doing things and all that stuff, and it's hard in that way. And that's maybe where you feel you are with Jesus right now. That you realize that God is asking you to do things and trust in him in certain ways and give up control in certain ways, and you're like, God, I am the wrong tool for the job. Like, look at all these people Look at all these Davids of the world that have been doing it for years and know exactly how to do it better than me. Like, why don't you go ask them to do it? Because they're way better than I am, right? Maybe that's where you fit. But I think Saul's story can be an encouragement to us that Jesus isn't always going to pick the most obvious and the perfect person to fill the job description and do what he needs to be done. That he will work through your brokenness. So Jesus will work through your broken family to continue to raise the next generation in Jesus. That God is still going to work through your workplace, even though maybe leadership is not Christians and they're doing some illegal things. He's even going to work through maybe your family who you're trying to teach them about Jesus and love them, but they still don't believe in him. I don't know where that is, but I do know that God using you is the perfect plan, because Saul was the perfect plan, right? We see that there is a perfect plan through Saul to continue to grow the church. And you see, I think, just like verse 15 says, that Saul was the right person and he was the chosen person. And I think Jesus has chosen us for a specific people, the lost, to share Jesus. And specifically this area in South Tampa, that our world is crying out for Jesus right now, and Jesus is challenging us, who is going to share me with them? Who's going to show them what I'm for? Who's going to show them who I love or how I love? Who's going to show them what it means to heal or to love or have mercy or have grace? You see, Saul's story is our story too. That we are broken and that we need Jesus. So my declaration is that I think God is speaking through Acts 9 is this. God declares no sin can separate us from being a part of God's kingdom. If God can use broken people and sinful people like Saul, he can use me. He can use you. Second declaration is this, that God declares that we are his chosen instrument to share the message. That Jesus has a message for us to share with people. Who are we going to share that with? And the third is this, is that God declares you do not have to be perfect to share the message of God. You just have to be faithful. So today, as we close, the band's going to come up and we're going to play an invitation song. And I don't know where you are. Maybe you've never made that decision to follow Jesus. And maybe you feel more like Saul and that you've done way worse. That you feel like you've been so sinful and you're so unforgivable that there's no reason to even seek a relationship with Jesus. Or maybe you sit there and go, I don't even know if I need Jesus. I don't know where you are, but maybe you've never made that decision, and we'd love to talk through that with you during this song. Or maybe you feel like God's declaring some awesome, cool things in your life, but you feel like you're the wrong person for the job. We'd love to pray through those challenges with you. If you need prayer of healing or you need prayer of encouragement, I'd love to pray for you. Maybe you need God's declaring in your life community. That you need a group of people to do community with. And that New Beginnings is that people to do it with. We'd love to make New Beginnings your church home today. So come, pray with us, make those decisions. One last thing I want to share is what was really cool about that season of soccer, those 3 or 4 years, is that there were seasons of being captain that were really fun. My first 2 seasons, I enjoyed my team. I loved it. And my final season, I hated it. I was ready to move on. I already went to college later in my years, not right after high school, so I was already older than most of these 18 and 19-year-olds. It was so hard. And I remember just saying, God, all right, get me out of here. Like, I want to go to a ministry job. Like, let's go. I want to get my own apartment. I want to be, let's go. Let's get this over with. Like, I'm tired of this. Like, this season is kind of sucky. And maybe that's where you are right now. As you feel that this season where God has you, you're not being used, you're not growing, all those things. And my encouragement to you is that God has a reason for every season in our life, even here at New Beginnings. If there's a reason we're here, there's a reason you're hearing this, there's a reason you're in your community, there's a reason God is in your life. So who's the one you're sharing that with? Let's pray. God, we love you so much. God, we are so thankful for what you declare in our lives. God, we are thankful because of the cross that we can be a part of your story. God, thank you for loving us and choosing the salt in us to be a part of your story. That even though we may not be the first pick, that you still use us and equip us and train us for your glory. God, thank you for your son, Jesus. It's his name we pray.